Yeah. All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Amanda Hockley, and here on behalf of San Diego chapter ASCM. Thank you very much for coming along, and to Mark Keenan for coming and giving us a talk tonight on cybersecurity and in supply chain. And I'll hand it over to you, Mark, for introductions.
All right. So it's interesting. I usually do this presentation to compliance people who don't really know supply chain and are a little more familiar with cybersecurity, but they're really compliance people, really risk management type people. So some of this stuff to the supply chain people will be very rudimentary in the very beginning, but I promise you that there's plenty of material here to stretch your thinking and brain in terms of what's going on with this. So what's really interesting is the fact that the supply chains worldwide were really exposed and at great risk with COVID. Everybody saw what happened. I don't think I need to tell the supply chain people there were problems with manufacturing, there were problems with transportation, there was problems with, shortages, and it's quite diverse. The primary reason is the supply chain has grown so large at this point. It's global. The economies have grown so much, and a lot of it is outsourced where people don't have visibility to that. So the US government got quite concerned about this, both for the commercial industries and the government themselves. And they published a document called NIST-IR 8276. And I'm going to cover that as well as some other fairly detailed documents or sources of information for you on this to learn. But this has become a big subject in the last 12 months. Now, 8276 came out a year ago. So this is a year ago. Now, if you look everywhere online on the technical side from companies like IBM, they come out COVID-19 and shattered supply chains, because from a technical standpoint, the supply chains are quite messed up. My daughter works for Flexport. Anybody is familiar with Flexport? It's a big importer. She had Christmas trees stuck in the Los Angeles port. They might still be there, frankly. I don't know if they ever get out in time for Christmas to actually get delivered, but she had containers full of Christmas trees stuck in the LA ports up in Long Beach. So when we look at it, to a lot of the non-supply chain people, personally, I've lived in Southern California since 1985, and I've never seen anything like what I see with the ships backed up along the coast. They were so problematic in Long Beach that they made them line up. They did the same thing in Oakland, but they're backed up about 100 miles. I'm hearing all sorts of different data from different people on when the ports will clear. I originally heard June, July. Then I talked to an expert out of Singapore in January at the big NRF convention. And she told me the Asian ports will be lucky to clear by end of the year, or some of them won't clear till 2024 because they're under capacity by about 20%. So what that creates is a significant vulnerability. And the cost of these, I think you're aware, has just shot to the moon. I pulled some articles on this. Now, it's really interesting. I pulled this article maybe a few weeks ago, and simultaneous to that, it was talking about the Russia-Ukraine issue that we're dealing with right now that just seems to get worse by the day. And if you didn't see the news, the Russians have already started cyber attacking the Ukraine banks and infrastructure. Okay, if you didn't see that, that's actually in progress as we speak. They haven't attacked us yet directly in this, but hold your horses. Now, for those that aren't familiar, that don't understand supply chain, I don't know what 2021 statistics were, but I pulled some statistics of seaborne shipping for 2019, and it was based at $14 trillion. To me, there's a reason the US government's worried about it. That's a very, very big number, right? So this is much bigger issue than most consumers, business people, or others understand. They don't really understand the magnitude of the issue here. So one of the big problems that they're worried about today is the Department of Homeland Security, and this is back from January 24th, and these issues come out now, is a Russian cyber attack on US infrastructure. Both this, when we talk infrastructure, they're talking about the supply chain across the board. And if you think that the Russians haven't been working on this for the last decade, then you're wrong. We work on it too. We have the ability to counterattack in cyber, but the fact of the matter is that it's a significant vulnerability that we have. And they've actually tested some recent attacks prior to the Ukraine one. And we'll talk about those quite briefly on those attacks that you're familiar with in the news, but you probably didn't realize it was actually Russian entities behind those attacks. So there is a very good source for all of the different entities in the supply chain area called CISA, CISA.gov, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And it actually breaks it down by sector. So if you are a chemical or a commercial facility, communications, energy across the board, there's actually detailed information on this available online via CISA.gov. So I would tell you this is a resource if you're trying to get more educated on this to be able to go out and look at, okay? If you remember back in the fall, there was the big giant pipeline attack, the Colonial Pipeline hack that shut down fuel to most of the eastern seaboard of the United States, fuel deliveries, okay? What most people haven't really paid attention to after that is that actually was a Russian attack. Now they called them Russian criminals, but the fact of the matter is those Russian criminals generally have ties to the Russian government. We just call them criminals because unless we're at war with them, we don't want to say the Russian government just allowed some of their hackers to hack one of our major fuel providers to the eastern seaboard. But that's who actually did this hack, and it created massive problems to deliver fuel for trucking, automobiles, so on and so forth. There was also a secondary attack at a company out of Colorado called JBS. Now, if people aren't aware of, that was actually food. Most of the beef delivered, they're one of the largest beef suppliers to the United States, one of the largest wholesale suppliers based out of Colorado. And I actually had this conversation with the cybersecurity people out of Colorado, experts, and they were quite well aware. And that was also a Russian attack, FYI to you. So it's not the only ones that could attack us. We've got risks with the Iranians, the North Koreans, the Chinese, and others. But right now, our biggest risk because of the world stage is really the Russians. Now, one of the first cyber attacks in 2017 was really something called NotPetya. For those that aren't in the market and did, that actually cost about $10 billion worldwide. That was a very expensive attack. And it was really directed at a lot of the supply chain people around the world. There was also one that people aren't aware of. There's really two significant worries when we're dealing with cybersecurity and supply chain. The first worry is that they will attack your key suppliers so that you will not be able to get parts, you will not be able to get product, you will not be able to get delivery of parts as a manufacturer or a retailer or a distributor. You can't do that. Or the other very significant problem with these supply chain systems connect to each other, EDI and other types of connections, electronic connections across your suppliers' systems and your systems, and they will use your suppliers as an attack vector to your systems. And that happened to Target back in 2014, the very large retailer out of Minneapolis. Basically, they attacked their HVAC suppliers, okay, and used that as a vector into Target's network and stole something like 100 million credit cards. Now, I think even the CEO lost his job over that one. So these things, from a supply chain standpoint, are a problem. what makes it a bigger problem today is that our supply chains are kind of broken right now. The international supplies are backed up. There's all sorts of disruption in the product deliveries. I mean, we didn't have toilet paper or paper towel or this. If you looked at the retailer shelves over the Christmas holidays and you looked at the empty boxes that they filled all these shelves on, it's because they weren't able to fill it with normal product. So they tried to cover up the fact that they couldn't get product deliveries. So because it's already at risk, now to cyber attack it and disrupt it even further becomes a much bigger problem than in times where the supply chain is completely stable and a little more resilient. It also depends upon what industry you're in. If you're a grocer and you cannot get food on the shelves, that is a very significant problem in a market. If you can't get food to people, if you are energy and people's power gets shut off, or their water gets shut off, or their gasoline doesn't get delivered, these become more than economic issues. They become national security and economic issues. So the people that are familiar with people like RAND, the big think tank, I think they're based out of Santa Monica, actually. One of these PhDs in operations research sees the combination of cyber attacks with supply chain as a incredibly dangerous and wicked new form of risk, because it puts the entire economy at risk and our national security potentially at risk. It's both. So that's a highly dangerous problem that isn't well thought of today. It was worried about enough that at the same time NIST IR came out in February of 2021, there was also an executive order from the Biden administration on the supply chains. Very worried about the supply chains to the government, the military, and the other areas, because during COVID, they acknowledged that there was dramatically greater risk now than there was a few years ago. So the federal government has jumped into this with both feet right now. So looking at this particular document, NIST, for those of you who are not familiar with NIST, NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technologies. It is a multi-billion-dollar entity within the federal government. And it is I've heard people refer to it as a jewel in the federal government. It has, last I looked, probably 3,000 or 4,000 experts in this area dealing with everything around standards and technology and risk. So it is a fantastic resource if you know what to find in there. And I'm going to jump out momentarily in a minute and show you some of these resources that we will cover, okay? So let me do that for 1 second. I'm going to jump out of this presentation. In NIST, the first thing, if I were in supply chain, that I would highly recommend you go out and read is this particular document that came out last year called NIST 8276. You're able to download this directly. It's free. There's no cost for this. So you can just go and download it. And it's specifically about this topic, key practices in cyber supply chain risk management. So they've looked at this, they've analyzed it. These are very smart people that wrote the initial documents with a lot of input in there. There's a second document. Sorry, somebody texted me and disrupted me there for a second. The second document out there for those that want to look at cybersecurity that also comes from NIST, called the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. And this is an important thing. By the way, adoption in cybersecurity, more than 50% of the companies in the United States use this cybersecurity framework as their framework for their cybersecurity programs. And it is called out in the NIST 8276 documents, okay? There is another one I'm going to point you to that actually is a open source data source for information about security and privacy called the Secure Controls Framework. In this particular framework, you have the ability to load down detailed data about all the different types of cyber and other frameworks. This is not for the faint of heart. I will warn you on this one. This one is a beast. There's a combination in there of 1,000 rows and I forget how many columns. And within the individual fields, some of them divide up. So we figured if you divide this out the way it needs to be, there might be 1.5 million to 2.5 million records in this open source of data. But be aware that this stuff is available online free, and these are 3 free sources to do research here. Okay. So let me get back, and I will do this from the current slide. So what NIST 8276 says to people in the supply chain is these 8 things are pulled directly from that document recommendation, that you need to integrate your cyber supply chain risk management across the organization, create some kind of formal program to know and manage your critical suppliers. Okay. So you need a way to collaborate with them to look to see, is this supplier at significant risk? So, and if so, what do I need to really do about this from planning the supply chain management? So if they are a supplier, for example, that is unique and they're the only one that can provide you either this component or this other item, then you may have to work with them. If their cyber is very weak, you may have to figure out a way to bolster their cyber, get them to reach out to companies like ours or others that can actually bolster their cyber program. But in order to do that, you need to know if they have issues with their cyber program and what they are. Okay, so that's what these programs are really designed to do, is to analyze your key suppliers and determine if there are risk issues, and you have to make decisions what you do and what is acceptable risk there, and how do you mitigate that risk in your supply chain. Oops. Okay. All right, there we go. So the appendixes in those documents are pretty good. If you're dealing with the government, you're going to see something called NIST 800-161, okay, and 162 for that matter. But that focuses on government agencies. For most commercial entities, you're going to see NIST Cybersecurity Framework, okay? And we're also going to talk briefly about something called CMMI for defense contractors. So if you deal with the defense industry, you need to deal with something different. With this, it's a cyber maturity assessment that the Pentagon and the defense contractors are required to adhere to. Okay. Now, for those, there's other ones out here. ISO tends to be more of an international one. If you are more of US based and your others, I would aim at NIST Cybersecurity Framework, or if you're a government agency, NIST SP 800-161. Okay. We talked about this particular area, this open source of data. So if you're trying to do some of this yourself and you're trying to get data, this is a great source, but I'll repeat, maybe I'll even show it quickly here. Hold on, I didn't plan to do that, but I think I'm going to. Let me open something. And let's see this right here. Okay. So this is what that document looks like. It gives you security and governance controls. It gives you all of the different frameworks, and it does something else that we're going to talk about in a minute, which is called capability matrix, CMMI, and we'll talk about that. But if we look here, this gives you all of these different control frameworks. Here is NIST. You'll see all of the different NIST ones. So this data has already been assembled for most people and is available here. A lot of people are not aware that this was available in open source format. Okay. Okay, from current slide. All right. So really the goal of this is, how do we take what's seems very complex and very difficult to implement and do two things with it. A, you've got to be able to measure it, and B, you've got to make it actionable. Those two are the two requirements. So in order to assess your suppliers, because they're likely to be all over the place, you know, if they're in this country or even in this continent, you need a way to actually distribute that out. The easiest standards to use, the easiest, are probably the NIST cybersecurity framework, but I would highly recommend you don't try to roll your risk groups, because then you'll miss too much. The complexities there, and you should take, I call it standing on the shoulders of giants. NIST was written by hundreds, if not thousands, of people putting input, and therefore created it. And there is something called the capability maturity model integration. It was originally developed out of Carnegie Mellon back in the late 1980s. It is a project management standard out there for projects for measurement. And most people have dealt with this in some form or another, and don't realize it. CMMC, and I'm stepping out, is the government's version of NIST 800, 161, and 162, frankly, and a measurement process. We usually use 1 to 5, not 0 to 5 on this one, but they changed it. I think I took B2 out of there. That's interesting. In version 2 for CMMC, they've changed this where there is only 1, 2, 3 levels. The government changed it. I don't agree with that decision because it pushed them outside of the standards, and therefore they became a little bit of an island in this. But if you are a defense contractor, CMMC is generally a requirement, a CMMC assessment. The more standard model for CMMI uses this 1 to 5 stair step, where initially things are unpredictable and reactive, or you're managing them on a project level, all the way up to stable and flexible, where you have an optimized program. So this gives you a numeric score. So if you're measuring your suppliers, instead of trying to do a subjective type analysis of them, this will allow you to do a standardized numeric analysis. But in order to do this, you need to have capabilities. Okay. And there we go. CMMC, it got mixed up. Sorry about that one. This was what I was talking about with CMMC v2. They ventured outside of traditional CMMI, but the CMM really came out of this CMMI integration to the NIST documents. Okay. So when we look at this, go further, the NIST documents come down in a spreadsheet like this, and they'll be color coded. So NIST will say asset management. You need to understand, are they managing their IT assets? Okay. And now these are other references, but the ones you would worry about are these. Am I managing my software platforms? Am I managing organizational communications and data mapping? Now, the problem with these, there are about 100 subcategories within the NIST cybersecurity framework, but they're only qualitative, meaning they don't give you a way to have a measurement of any sort. And it's not a yes or no. These are quite complex questions, and they're not a yes or no question. So the way to solve that is to layer a capability matrix below that from things like the secure control framework that I showed you. Okay, so generally, the best programs for these type of programs take a framework and layer in a capability matrix. The benefit of the framework is it's risk focused. The narrative is relatively easy to understand, and they are standards in the industry. The benefit of the capability matrix is it allows you to do gradations of how well you're doing. Are you novice at 1, or in a particular area, are you optimized at a 5 or somewhere in between? And the reality is your programs will have different areas that are anywhere from a 1 to a 5, and different areas will be more important for different organizations. So you need some sanity check on that to say you're never going to be a level 5 in all areas. If you are, somebody's lying to you, because that's very difficult to do. It'd be like being a genius in every area. And even Einstein, couldn't remember where he lived sometimes, if I remember correctly. So he was brilliant, but he wasn't a genius in everything. So the idea, what we've done with other clients, or the ones we've seen that have done this successfully, take this and use cloud type technologies to deploy this and put it into a format that's simple, easy for novice users to take a complex subject like cyber supply chain risk management in NIST cybersecurity framework, which is identified as how you should be assessing your suppliers, and put it into something easier to assess or easier to do. Now, these color coding, if you look at identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, are the same as, let's go NIST cybersecurity framework. You'll see that NIST does identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So they give you this framework in this version, and they're available to download. And if you're a novice, take the PDF first and then the Excel. The Excel is somewhat assumes you've already read the PDF document that explains how this works. Okay, a little slow. There we go. So this document looks like this. It's you'll notice there's a supply chain risk management component already embedded into the NIST cybersecurity framework. That's why they're telling you you should use this. There is an RFI from the government asking for enhancements specifically to this section of the supply chain risk management area that just came out. One of my coworkers said, oh, they're asking for new stuff. I said, yeah, it'll be 2 years typically. I mean, this stuff doesn't change that rapidly because it's fairly complex, but it is identified right in the NIST cybersecurity framework, where supply chain is called out as its own subcategory in here. Okay. Okay. I apologize for jumping around, but I'm trying to give you more resources when you leave this call of where you can go and do the search and understand how those things work, or where the background is available. Now, it's one thing to assess, but if you cannot report on assessing, you need a way to measure, because when you do CMMI, okay, CMMI is a continuous improvement model. It is really expecting you to measure where you are in different areas and then decide what steps you need to take to bolster the weaker areas that you have into an acceptable level of maturity. And I'll repeat, that does not mean everything becomes a 5. It might mean in areas that are not high risk for your organization, that a 2 or a 3 is acceptable. In the areas that are high risk, you're going to want to get up, to a 4 or 5 potentially. But you actually have to assess the business you're in, what the level of risk is on your data. So if you have intellectual property, for example, that would be something that a foreign government would want to steal, then those documents would be high risk and need to have higher levels of protection to make sure they're not stealing, both company secrets and or government secrets in those. Okay, so we talked about this. The key is to make it usable. How do you take, as I said, this very complex thing and make it usable? And the answer is The technology today allows you to do that, but it's the web and the cloud. You need a secure web and cloud, but the web and cloud is the answer. And then there is reporting that you need to do on it, both at the individual supplier level, but I would also do reporting across all of the suppliers that you've assessed to see if there is weaknesses that are kind of consistent across the suppliers, because that'll give you a better target of which areas to target first to get the biggest risk reduction for the effort. Now, when we look at supply chain assessments, okay, NIST, I've talked a lot about NIST, cybersecurity framework, but the truth of the matter is the supply chain people aren't aware of this, may not be aware of this, but different organizations will often have multiple frameworks that they need to adhere to. So you might be required to do something like NIST 853 instead of NIST cybersecurity framework. Or if you're a multinational and you're doing cyber, you would use ISO 27001. Now, all of these frameworks exist in the secure controls framework that I showed you. It has about 160 different ones in there, but they exist, so it is a good source. One of the things that's important there is something called minimum compliance controls. So let's say you needed to do NIST 800 and NIST CSF, okay? If you do it correctly, when you fill out one, it should automatically populate the capabilities in the other so that you're not duplicating effort. All of these frameworks have an incredible amount of overlap. They're not identical, but they have an incredible amount of overlap. So you need to be smart when you're working on these assessment areas so that you don't make it as difficult. Now, the example I'm going to show you was built into the Salesforce network. So the reason Salesforce is a good choice is it's a predefined platform with all of the cybersecurity from an infrastructure standpoint built into the platform. So you do not have to build that yourself, okay? It's already all there. And it allows you to have an isolated incidence because once you've done this, this doesn't get shared. You want your stuff to be locked down to your company only so that others can't access or view this. So if you are looking at these, also Salesforce, I think, is in 50 languages. So if you need to assess foreign suppliers, that type of platform is good. There's a few other platforms out there like that. Maybe a ServiceNow platform would give you similar capabilities, et cetera. But Salesforce is a little more cost effective, and I'm being kind. It's probably a lot more cost effective, but it's just an example of how to do it. So there is a big difference between third-party and internal assessments, okay? So if you're going to do these assessments with your suppliers, it's probably a good idea to run it internally, but internally is easier because you're asking people internally to validate or answer specific questions, and you have that contained within the organization. So you don't have the issue of how do I get 200 contacts at 200 suppliers as a simple example to answer this globally. So when you go from internal to external or third-party assessments, in this case, a supply chain assessment, you really have to have portal applications for your suppliers. You need a way to manage that interaction. You need to be able to modify those assessments for the different types. And you really need this kind of circular process that says, get to the suppliers, manage the interactions, have an assessment that you can build, measure what's going on with them, analyze it, and then communicate back to them. So that is different than when you're a risk analyst internally with internal employees. As I said, that's while difficult, it is still a lot easier than doing external third-party assessments, frankly, are a weakness of most entities, okay? So we recommend you do things like dedicated supplier communities. You need an automated onboarding process to onboard key suppliers and measure who is onboarded, and you need risk measurements. We like open source material because the problem you have is if you're using proprietary material of your own, then if you have to assess differently in the future, somebody will come to you from an executive management or your suppliers or the others and say, well, why am I answering these particular questions? What made these questions important? And I would instantly say to them, if you're using NIST or ISO, well, this is a national or international standard. We didn't make this up ourselves. So it's easily justifiable, both if you're a public company to the market, where you have to report in your 10K, or to executive management, or to external suppliers. Using those standards gives you a defensible position as to why you ask those specific questions and those answers. If you do it on your own, you're kind of on your own, and it's much more difficult to do that. We have seen out there people recently using incentive campaigns or almost gamification of this. So that's a really interesting idea. Some of them want to use it to actually do creative funding and have their suppliers do a low-cost supplier assessment where you do a little credit card program. They have to spend a nominal amount each to, access the assessment technology to make their life easier. But in doing that, you can use that to self-fund this assessment program, because in most cases, you're dealing with budgets, and everybody's budgets are always fighting for different things. So there are creative ways we've seen this done out in the marketplace, and one of them is supplier funded programs. Okay. I talked about this really being a continuous improvement life cycle. These programs are not a one and done. They're really designed for you to do them on a periodic basis. Some organizations require certain compliance things to be done quarterly, some are biannually. I have not seen any annual ones right now. Typically, annual is a pretty long poll, so most people are doing them at twice a year on the shortest of this one. But the reasons to do it are to have objectives once you've done it the first time, analyze it, create ways to improve or to reduce your risk of getting disrupted by a cyber attack via your supply chain, and feed that back into the suppliers so that in your next assessment you could see, have you made progress in reducing the company's overall risk of getting shut down from an attack on a key supplier, or minimizing the risk of these suppliers feeding an attack directly into your company. Okay, so I always put this, why does it matter? Okay, so we talked, to kind of summarize it, the shutdown of your company either indirectly by disrupting your supply chain, or directly by using the supply chain as an attack vector. You need to do this because executive management needs to understand the business risks. If you're public, shareholders, typically, if you read 10Ks, required to do this. But generally, it's loss, growth, and customer issues you're worried about. Then when we get into the national security issues, those get kind of scary. Those are the, CNN, I'm going to scare everyone to death issues, but those are real. They could disrupt, if they disrupt certain places in the supply chain, food deliveries, water, power, gas, defense, so on and so forth. And those become, I unfortunately have had the unfortunate experience of living through riots, in the busing riots in Boston, Massachusetts as a high school student, and the Rodney King riots in LA, because I lived in LA and California before I moved to San Diego. And I can assure you, they're not fun. And if we get hit with that bad of a infrastructure attack, if people can't get food, if people can't get water, if they can't get power, then civil unrest becomes a very, very distinct possibility. And frankly, it's a very scary situation. So my view is the government is very wise to be looking at this point and making sure that while in this type of attack, there might be some disruption, that we minimize the disruption and not get to a point where we get to the scary scenarios. Okay. These are contacts, but I'm going to actually show you a live example of this. But anybody who wants to contact this, and I don't know why this is a comma instead of a period, you can contact myself, mark.keelan@ust.com, or Austin Gould, who works with me on the marketing side to help you with this. We will help you. You know, you don't have to be a customer. You don't have to be this. I'm in the ISSA Cybersecurity organization on their advisory board in LA. I'm on the privacy board as a co-chair in LA as well. I'm an ISACA member who is the audit and risk personnel. So I'm very active in these communities. I will help guide you to resources. I will try to help people who are looking for work in these areas. You know, our goal is, I've been doing this long enough that I want to give back, and I do give back a lot of my time in this. But I'm going to actually show you a live example of how you could do this. We could stop briefly for questions before I do that. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask before I go to a live example? I did not see any in the chat. So let me ask a question. This is a supply chain group. How familiar is this material to people in the group? Amanda, have you seen this material in the past?
I haven't seen anything, not before.
Okay. Do you think this is useful from a supply chain standpoint? Is this information that's useful for you?
I think the other people will be able to answer better, actually, if they want to unmute and give some feedback, because I work for San Diego, so
that's okay. I'm asking this for the supply chain people because I want to know if this is material that is helpful for you. Our goal in these is actually to help you. So just initially, I'd like to know how new this material is. Is anybody here a defense contractor on this?
No, I can't speak for the group, but I've been around defense contracting for most of my adult life, and I've been aware of the need for cyber protection for years and years and years, but I don't think I've drilled down this deep before. So I think for me, at least, it's a kind of a wake-up call about the complexity of that's under the covers.
Okay, that's good feedback. I appreciate that. I see from Dave, who is that speaking?
It's Preston.
Preston, thank you, Preston. That was useful. So Dave, it is new to me. I teach supply chain risk, but mostly supply chain and products, not cyber risk. Okay. I do think cyber risk is bigger and bigger today. The fact of the matter is, when we're moving trillions of dollars of goods around the world constantly, everything is electronic now. And if you really want to disrupt it, it's quite frightening, because you can hit IoT devices like a gas pump. You know, we could hack a gas pump. I can tell you, as somebody who knows about some of these devices and others, I could do just a prank. I could shut down billing for San Diego Gas and Electric, just as an interesting comment to everyone here. Did you know that in your neighborhoods here in San Diego, that one of the meters in the neighborhood actually acts as a consolidator for all the bills for the neighborhood, that those are wireless electronic devices? If I just find which one it is in the neighborhood and cover it with tinfoil, then none of the bills will arrive because they won't get any of the billing data. Okay, stupid hack, very simple, but instantly disrupts the billing to San Diego Gas and Electric. Crazy that it's that simple. But these type of risks exist all over the supply chain, and really they should be doing some assessment there. If they're not, then you can do a great job in all of your other risk areas, but you shut down all of your electronic ability to see any of your areas, to see shipment, to see receipts, to see orders, to see, et cetera. Everything comes to a screeching halt. And as I'll repeat, the government looked at it. So let me do something else right now. Let me take a second and show you a live example of what something like this looks like. So this is an example in Salesforce that you can load in suppliers. So you would just take your supplier data. By the way, some of this stuff I'm not going to hit go to because some of this is real data. A lot of this is done in Bradstreet data loaded out. So a lot of these are actually real entities in this database. You can then take the contacts within those suppliers. So these are third parties that you do business with. And all of you have these supplier networks in your purchasing or other areas, okay? And you can create assessment areas for these and say, I'm going to do a assessment. Now, in this particular case, I'm going to show you a couple of examples of what you should get out of an assessment so that you know. So this is an onboarding in the US for a particular company to say, I'm going to onboard new suppliers into my risk management from a third party. And they're saying they do this for the first half of 2022. And in this particular case, there were 100 and what is that? Was there a question? Okay, so this is an example where I have 106 suppliers that I've sent out information to onboard onto a campaign. Okay, so to do that's complicated. So what normally you would do is use a tool like a Salesforce or something similar, and you would go out there and say, okay, I'm going to take this campaign and I'm going to send a list to onboard this particular group of people. And in those cases, you can actually just grab and create email templates, different types of templates. This one says, welcome to the supply chain risk reduction community. And it will fill in all of the data and send this out to the suppliers that you've selected for this particular campaign. Now, you can do as many of these types of things as you want. You can actually have a follow-up campaign to those that didn't. Okay, so I'm going to overwrite this one just as an example. A follow-up campaign that says, important notice, your cybersecurity risk assessment is due. You haven't responded. And you can just select those and send them to those. I'm not going to send those because I'll repeat, this is actually real data from D&B. But I could have just selected, in this particular instance, it's showing me the numbers that were sent versus the numbers that responded. So I could just select the 78 here that had not yet responded back to the campaign and send it to them. And what they will get is something that, however you set it up, but this is an exact example of what gets sent. So I sent this in my test environment, sent this out to me, and I get this, welcome to A1 Incorporated to supply chain risk. It's an online community. Here we go to do your assessment. And it can bring them to a web portal that says, and by the way, if you're, locally Viasat or Solar Turbine or whoever you are, you can make this yours. You don't have to make this say somebody else, and you can get them to onboard via the assessments, right? Via a portal like this, and it's just a web page. Now, I have a more advanced portal for me. So these portal type applications can be very simple or a little more advanced, depending upon who you're dealing with. You could use these for CMMC if you're a defense contractor, ISO if you're multinational. You're not limited to the example that I have here, but I'm going to use, I'm going to go into my reporting portal first because I'm an advanced user, but then I'm going to just jump you into what these would look like. So I'm going to start an assessment. In this case, I'm going to do a NIST cybersecurity assessment. So it just brings them into this. Now, if you want to assess, we have somebody who trains other supply chain issues. If you have a supply chain assessment that's not cyber related. This same process and technology is available. I'll nerd out for a second. This is metadata where it says identify, protect, detect, respond. This is not somebody coding it into a computer. So that means if you take it and you load it into the system, this could be, product, this could be warranty, this could be anything that you want to put in there to do your individual assessments. And it's designed that multiple people can work on an assessment, just go and answer their response. In our case, we use yes, in progress or no, because we're using a capability matrix that says, does system baseline configuration generate logs, et cetera, et cetera. This is a very specific detection question in cybersecurity that the cyber people that handle detection will know the answer to at your customer. They will know this answer. And somebody else that deals with asset management can go in and answer and know the answer to that question. And they can just, now I've answered one out of this, and I could just jump to wherever I belong as the person answering this. So it takes this fairly difficult and onerous looking frameworks, and you put it into something that you can distribute out, they can easily get onto, they can easily respond, and it will track who answered, when they answered, what they answered, so that you can use this in the future. Normally, the hardest thing to do is the first assessment. After that, you can copy your previous one and only change the areas where you've made changes. So let's say I fixed by anomaly detection in cyber. Since the last time I was assessed, I would go in and go directly to those areas and change my answers in those areas. So it's really quite useful, quite easy, doesn't have to be difficult. And we generally can guide companies how to put a program like this. We do everything in the cloud. We're pretty state of the art. We're about 30,000 people and growing leaps and bounds. So for those that need help, if you're a novice, smaller, this scales up and down from fairly small to pretty much gigantic. So we can help most entities with this area. Okay, I think that's really enough. Just to remember, I've tried to include the links for the NIST documents here, NIST 8276, NIST .gov Cybersecurity Framework, and the Secure Controls Framework site. All of those are good sites for you. If you want to learn more in this stuff, I'm happy to set up a call and help educate or do anything I can to help this. I would like my food, water, and power to continue to be delivered. And I don't trust that over time, we won't see more and more of these supply chain attacks that we already saw really in the last year. Okay, so I'm going to stop and open it up to questions again. I'm going to stop that. I'll leave the share just in case somebody wants me to go to a particular area.
I have a question.
Yes.
Have you worked with anyone in incorporating this into SCORE? That's SCOR. It's a framework for modeling a supply chain and looking at the competence of the supplier community. And it goes upstream, supplier by supplier. There's 5 different layers to it. And one of the real considerations is risk. Just will that supplier be there? Are they capable? Can they produce a quality product? They invest in, so there's elements in there where they try to define the risk level. Have you had any clients that have used?
I am a little familiar with that, but we have a massive supply chain practice. I was telling Amanda at the beginning of the meeting that I spent over 2 decades in ERP and the other areas.
Right.
But if you have a particular framework that you want to load, you can pretty much load anything in there with a scoring mechanism and a risk. So I can go take a look at that for you and evaluate how easy that would be to load. But I
Right.
suspect that we are going to add that to the list of ones that I showed you, primarily because we have a massive supply chain practice that I am part of. We fall under our data management group, and we do supply chain work for Walmart, Costco, and others. Those two I've named because they're just so gigantic. We have hundreds of people working in their IT and supply chain areas today. I actually was involved years ago in a group that did demand forecasting for Walmart worldwide.
Okay, so, yeah.
So to answer your question, I'm familiar with it. I would have to do a little homework to definitively answer that. But as long as it's a question risk-based score model, then the answer is, I believe the answer is probably yes, but I'd want to look at it first.
Okay, it actually goes risk, the performance, benchmarking, it has all that involved. I have lots more questions, but I don't want to hog it.
No, hog away at this point.
Yeah.
I think I'm willing to stay over if you have more, if other people have more questions. It is not like I have other meetings at 6:40 at night. I mean, okay. The only meeting I have is with my car to drive to LA tonight, because I'm at a cybersecurity conference in LA tomorrow. So what are your other questions? Please shoot.
Well, silence gives me an opportunity, but it seems to me that the effort, the required effort and the needed effort to have this level of cybersecurity suggests that any organization should really try to make sure their supply chains aren't convoluted. And because there's a lot of effort put into this. It's just not incidental on something that's done apparently in a very short period of time. It takes energy and study and learning. So out of this whole thing, what is your comment about rationalizing supply chains, making them less complicated? Because with complication, that means you add a lot of risk. For example, everybody, and the procurement side seem to be very interested in getting, for periods of time in the past, a low-cost supplier and adding multiple suppliers for the same product, just to make sure that they had buffers and they always could keep costs down. What do you say to trying to streamline the supply chain while you're doing all of this? It seems to me that the more suppliers you have, the more complication you have.
It's a good comment. I think but I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all answer. So let's just use an example. Let's say I'm a manufacturer and I talk to a manufacturer, a fairly detailed manufacturer that's about 50% commercial and about 50% defense. They have defense business, they have commercial. If I had a key component in my defense business and it was from multiple untested cyber suppliers and the others, I would fail my CMMC audit. If those were key components, I'd fail. You know, I'd have a huge problem. They might shut me off as a supplier to the defense industry. If it were in my commercial side, then I'd have to look at how key is that particular component and how much risk does that supplier put me. But I believe that there is additional overhead with additional suppliers, right? So, you know, just throwing on more and more and more suppliers without having done any risk assessment of those suppliers is dangerous for a lot of reasons, right? It's technically dangerous from a cybersecurity standpoint, without question, technically very dangerous, because I got an example. I was in a breach out in Oh, it was in St. Louis, and in that particular breach, they stole millions of dollars in this particular case of credit card value, because this company had stored value cards. They sucked out a few $1 million. And they were adding new suppliers, and they didn't realize that these suppliers were actually offshore entities. And these offshore entities were where the attack came from, right? Because there's many places, Ukraine included, frankly, not just the Russians, where it's a job to be a hacker. It's your career, and it's a big business. And not only is it national security, but it's also an economic issue where they will make a lot of money. Or they do what they did with Colonial or JBS, and they blackmail you. They'll use ransomware and they'll blackmail you and say, we will not turn it on. We had it in San Diego. Is anyone else here? Scripps? Scripps was shut down with a cyber attack from the health side here at Scripps. They were 100% manual because they were completely shut down in a cyber attack where they couldn't deliver. They struggled to deliver their health services in the middle of COVID, right? Horrific. You know, that happened here in San Diego. I don't know what, I'm a Scripps person, you know, it was bad, you know. So they attacked our healthcare. Healthcare has been under great attack during COVID, actually. The cyber people have been after healthcare during COVID. So to answer your question, I think it's a terrible idea not to do some kind of assessment of that supplier from a risk standpoint. And it's not just cyber, right?
Right.
I would and if it's a low risk area with a low risk component or a low risk product, okay, might not be as concerned. If it is a key product, key this, that, I would be, if I were the cyber person, I'd be screaming bloody murder. I would. I'd scream bloody murder. What? Saying, what are you doing? You have no idea. You just added a Chinese or Russian manufacturer. So the US government, there used to be a virus product that you could load on your PC that was actually written by the Russians with backdoors into it.
Yep.
And you can't buy that in the US anymore. Nobody buys that anymore because the government said, no, no, no. TikTok, just so you're aware, anybody using TikTok, TikTok is proven spyware. Proven, okay? If you don't think you're at risk, if you're using it on a personal device and you never connect to your office and you never connect to anything else, fine. But if you connect to your corporate with the same device that you're running TikTok on, that is spyware, proven. I won't touch TikTok. I won't put it on any devices because it is spyware, okay? So if you're corporate and you're doing an assessment and you're doing that, WhatsApp, popular chat worldwide, owned by Facebook. Think Cambridge Analytica, where all that data was given out that they weren't supposed to give. You know, somebody else owns your secure informational data that you're chatting with people on. Very dangerous, terrible. Not something you should allow. I'd shut it off. And I don't do it because of that. But I'm cyber trained, right? So I know things that you can't do. How many people think their suppliers have employees using TikTok? Everybody here should be putting their hand up because I'm willing to bet, unless they're, you know, they're using TikTok and it is known spyware, you know, known. So, and it hasn't been fixed because it's still owned by what people don't know is in China, the government ultimately is the arbiter of all the truth and owns everything. So your phone, if you go to China, the root of your phone on an iPhone is controlled by the Chinese government as soon as it connects to the network. They can take everything off your phone, everything. So would I allow that? Wouldn't allow it. You go to those countries, you go with the burner phone. It's the only phone you're allowed to take. Sorry, I went off on a tangent there, but unknown suppliers, unknown devices, no risk management on this stuff is crazy for key suppliers. Not for, if somebody's supplying toilet paper to your office, okay, I might not worry too much about it. Unless You let them connect to your corporate network as the janitor service like they did for Target, the HVAC supplier. Now I'd want to know that janitorial service major entity, how safe that is if I allowed it to connect to my corporate systems. Because if it connects, it can use that as a gateway or a road for the hackers to travel in, hack the other one, travel in via that. You open the door, right? You don't want to open that door. And if you didn't assess them, would you let somebody into your house who is a known criminal or you've never assessed into your home, when you're not there? So ask the same question. Would you? Of course you wouldn't. Same thing you're doing with these computers, because they're there 24 hours a day. That connection's going 24 hours a day. You're not there, you're not monitoring it. You don't really know what they're doing.
I have another question, and I don't want to hog it out here, but if someone wants me to stop, they should just yell. But how does blockchain work with all this information that you're using the cloud, and transactions are occurring that if someone were able to hack the journey of the information back to you, because you're the one that wants to know, you're the supply chain master, how do you protect it? And is blockchain part of that protection, or is there other protocols that are superior to just the integrity of the data?
Truthfully, blockchain is a good technology if you're trying to do a secure audit. If you use blockchain, you can tell if those records have been modified. So we do use blockchain in certain areas for audit tracking. If I were just doing it for a compliance assessment, then I would be less worried about them getting access, because these are very secure systems and they're not transactional systems. These are audit systems unless they're in your supply chain or other areas. The benefits of blockchain is it's very, very secure from an audit, and you can tell if it's modified. Contrary to popular belief, though, in Bitcoin and the others. Now, Bitcoin and those blockchain things were originally, I think, built for the dark web and built for nefarious reasons. Moving money. So the drug people didn't want to move pallet loads of cash. They wanted to move electronic bits around, and they didn't want to be in the banking system. So I have some serious concerns about that. However, if you steal enough, or if you are enough, those are actually traceable if the cyber people are willing to put in the massive amount of effort it's required. It is not fully anonymous at the level people think. The problem is the cost to do that is exorbitantly high. So they will only come after you if you are really, really a big and nasty provider. They won't touch you. And I'm saying, I don't know if it's $1 million to trace them down, but it's in the hundreds of thousands probably in most cases. It's not trivial, but it still can be done. So if the US government sees somebody moving massive Bitcoin, into someplace they don't like, then they can track that down. But they will only do it in very, very select cases. Did that answer your Bitcoin question?
Yeah. So it sounds like Bitcoin could be a player in helping people at least encapsulate, secure way how they're progressing in their journey, because as you said, it's a journey as to how long you implement it.
I wouldn't use Bitcoin on that really, but Bitcoin on a transactional system is a secure audit function.
Yeah, I should say blockchain, not Bitcoin.
Blockchain. Right. So blockchain is a secure audit function. So from an audit standpoint, as an auditor, if I can put a blockchain audit into my transactional systems, there is value there.
Good.
Carlos has his hand up.
Hey, Carlos, you're on mute.
Yeah, let me unmute. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Amanda. And thank you, Mark, for the presentation. I was just wanted to point out, you were asking about some of the issues of cybersecurity in supply chains. Yes, yesterday, a port in India was shut down because of a cyber attack. So Now imagine what would happen if we had the Port of Long Beach or Los Angeles being shut down for a full day. That's millions of dollars being
Oh,
lost.
no, there's no question. There's no question that if the port of, if somebody in the government is not assessing the ports of LA and Long Beach, and you know, they obviously butt up against each other up there. I always laugh that they're called two different ports, but you know, they're side by side, right? And if Austin's still on the phone, his condo window looks out over the port. So he's up in San Pedro.
I'm here.
It's devastating. It'd be devastating to shut down those ports. Imagine the disruption that caused. And they're a mess already. Have you seen to the moon? They have stacked containers to the moon up there because they're so backed up. I've never seen any. It's pretty frightening. There's stuff, I don't know. I guarantee you there is stuff still that was supposed to be delivered for the Christmas rush in containers sitting at that port, right? I'm pretty confident.
And they will still be there for a while, though.
My daughter works for Flexport, as I was saying before, and she had Christmas trees for one of her customers stuck in a container. And I think I don't know whether, I don't think they care about them anymore, but they cared before Christmas and they didn't come out of the port ever.
That's
They were
it.
there for months, right?
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I get scared by this. I'm trying to get people to really look at this and say, we need to get serious about this and assess our suppliers and make sure we're not, as organizations, kind of like hanging our risk out in front of us, right? Hanging off the side of a cliff thinking we're feeling good. Okay. Any more questions at this point? I think I ran over by about 10 minutes, but I'm hoping this was useful. Please connect to me on LinkedIn. Happy to connect and help you. Cody, I know you already did it because you're out looking, an ex-Navy person looking for work, and I will connect you to veterans in these areas actually that will help you. There's a couple of good ones that will help you in San Diego.
Awesome. Yeah, I sent you that invite before the meeting started, so it should be there. And
I won't be back into my office until Friday. So I won't really look at it until Friday because I'm out of pocket all day tomorrow.
yeah, no worries. I'll just yeah, whenever you got time, if you want to connect or have
Friday.
a
I promise you I
one-on-one.
will do it Friday.
Awesome.
I
Yeah,
will take
thank
care of
you.
you on Friday.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Okay, Amanda, you're the boss. What do we do
Yeah,
now?
no, okay, no, if no one else has any other questions, then we'll wrap it up early. Everyone go off and have their evening and you can get your start driving.
Yeah, I will, and I hope this was useful information for the group. I know there's a lot of material here, but I hope I put it in a format that was more palatable.
Yeah, no,
I
thank
hope.
you for adding in extra security information at the beginning as well, so, you know, so everyone had more of an idea of what the problems are really. So yeah, that's very informational. Thank you very much for coming.
All right.
I'd
Thank you,
like to
everyone.
add as well, we have other events. I'll just put up a list in chat of our website where all our events are and classes. If anyone's interested, we've just started all our winter classes, but the summer ones are coming up. So if people are interested, just go to that website page. And thank you again, Mark. Thank you very much for coming along and doing that short notice.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, and thank
Good
you for
night.
the
Bye.
resources, Amanda.
Good night. Thank you.
Right. I'm going to end the recording.
Okay.